Hello, Neil. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for inviting me.
You've got a new book out, and as far as I understand, Prayers of the Cosmos is still your most popular introduction to the teachings of Jesus. Talk to me about why Book of Days is a better introduction.
There's a couple of reasons. One is Prayers of the Cosmos was written, nearly over 40 years ago, actually, now. So I've learned a lot more about Aramaic since then. Um, and also, since then, I've written a number of other books which have a lot more Aramaic.
Right.
In my book, The Hidden Gospel, I took Yeshua's keywords in Aramaic. You could say the 20 keywords that he uses in the Gospels, the words that he must have used if he spoke in his native language, which everyone agrees that he did. And
Yeah.
then I look at those chapter by chapter. And then I got really, you could say, more significantly into specifics because people were asking me about these, the second coming, all this stuff, which is really about what original meditation is about. And that book shows
Hmm.
how Yeshua and his people, all the people at that time, were not really focused on any sense of an end times. They were more focused on beginning times and how what was the beginning like and how does creation affect us even now. So creation was something that was continuing into the present moment.
Right.
And then to fast forward a couple of years ago, I published a longer book called Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus, which really gathered together a lot of the work of the 40 years. And that had I redid what I had done in Prayers to the Cosmos and expanded on that. I redid what I had done in many of the other books. But there's a lot of Aramaic. I mean, I'm giving word for word, actually, what these statements say. So I go into each word. And that was necessary for me to do. And many people love that book because they've been into some of this for a while. And even new people have benefited. But for a
Yeah.
lot of people, if they're not used to foreign languages, that's a lot of Aramaic for them to assimilate, even though I'm rendering it into English characters. So
Revelation
this
is
new
not
book,
the friendliest book. It's not handing anything to anyone on a silver platter.
it's no, I mean, it's quite challenging actually, in some ways, although I think it's as easy as I could have written it, given what it is. And there's little meditations along the way, but Aramaic Jesus Book of Days, the new one, the little book, which
Yeah, you
I'll
decided you could maybe make it easier. And I was almost surprised that you did this because your teaching style has always been this isn't easy. This is going to take a lot of background research and deep contemplation from many angles. Sorry, it'll take years. So when you put out a more user-friendly book, I was like, oh, he's going soft on us.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. But I had a prior experience with one of my Sufi books called the
Yeah.
Sufi Book of Life. And that took in a sort of small, short chapter format the 99 so-called beautiful names that are found in the Quran, the
Yeah.
Asma al-Husna, as they are in the Sufi tradition, and took those as sort of a, 800 word meditation or something that you would open as an oracle. So I decided, why not do this with Aramaic? I'll take a few short words, and you've got 40 days, you've got a plan for a 40-day retreat, or you've got an oracle, and you can open the book anywhere and you'll find something, hopefully, that your intuition is reflecting to you
Yeah.
that can help you today. So it's much less Aramaic, but it also, in some places, actually goes quite off the deep end, you could say, much further than even I went in my prior books. So some of these deeper ones, they sort of sneak up on you, these chapters.
So if the original worldview of Jesus, the way that he was experiencing reality and what he was trying to communicate is like a constellation, then each of these 40 concepts is like a star in that constellation. And if the reader can experience each one firsthand through meditation and contemplation and do that over time in whatever order works for them, they can get that constellation into their way of knowing. Is that the goal?
Yeah, that really is the goal. The goal is not to teach people Aramaic. The goal is not to teach people every word Jesus said or what every word means, but these are the
Right.
it's a good way to put it. These are the stars, the constellations that will put you in that universe
Yeah.
and place you into that, what scholars call that way of knowing or epistemology
Yeah.
that Yeshua shared with all of his listeners and with people at that time. And that is really essential to understanding the language. what I've discovered over the 40 years, or actually close to 50 now that I've been working on this, is that it's not just about the language, it's not just about the words or the letters, it's not just about words meant something different at the time of Jesus than they do now, but it's a different way of knowing, uh, and a different cosmology that Jesus and his people, and not just his close people, but everyone, even people that didn't like him, shared at that particular time. And
Yeah.
that's what I found lacking in the scholarly community as I participated in it over many, many years. Scholars who knew some of these languages or knew Greek even, they were imposing on ancient languages or ancient words in any case. Ancient languages can be ancient Greek that supposedly, are in the Gospels. They were imposing on these languages their own way of experiencing the universe, each other, and nature, these three. This is really the
Right.
key factors in what's called epistemology, their way of knowing. And no one was approaching this. So again, using the scholarly term, their hermeneutic, their way of interpreting the languages was all wrong, was completely, some of it was completely bonkers, frankly.
Yeah.
And some of
Like
it,
you're
people
already
just
wearing blue glasses and now you put something yellow in front of it. Well, now you're just seeing green, which has nothing to do with either one.
sort of like that. And I was in these some of these scholarly groups giving papers, and people, they're building these sandcastles in a certain way, and then they argue about certain things that somebody else has said, and all of them are completely starting on the wrong foot. And I remember at one of these groups where I was invited to give a paper, a scholarly paper, giving my talk, and I had a certain number of time. You have a certain amount of time, exactly time to the minute, and all this stuff, and you're only supposed to read the paper, and that's all you can do. And halfway through, that people didn't like what I was saying. They were trying to pull me down and cut my time short because they didn't want to hear it. Because basically, it called into question everything they'd done for 20 or 50 years or whatever.
Yeah, that's
And
annoying.
so that's difficult. I worked in the scholarly community for a number of years. I was the co-chair and co-chair of the mysticism group of the American Academy of Religion, and also worked in the Society of Biblical Studies. And it's very difficult. It's difficult for people because their positions depend on maintaining a certain position. Once they've built it, they have to publish papers, they have to climb the ladder, you know, all these things. And so they have to get funding for certain research, and
Yeah.
all this sort of builds a structure around them where they really don't want to change too much of what they're seeing. Publishing contracts are also subject to this. There are certain scholars in the scholarly community that are considered to be the ones for the big publishers to go get. And so
Right.
they go get them, and then they're considered the authorities, and you end up with all sorts of strange theories. And
And
these
your work
are
is
not
much
even
more
these are not even Christian theologians. These are just scholarly theories.
right, right. And you have a kind of more populist approach to doing scholarly work, which is how exactly is this work going to transfer the way of knowing of Jesus directly into the people that receive it, as opposed to how is this going to get me funding to do another paper after I'm done with this one?
Yeah, no, I never had that agenda when I went in, so I was sort of free. And I could write scholarly papers in a very scholarly manner. It's just another language, really. You have to use certain terms and set it up a certain way and all this. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I understood what my folks were working with, and my main goal at that point was really to sort of like just alert them a little bit. Hey, here's another way to look at all of this, and maybe this will help you. But
Yeah. So I would love to talk more about how you got yourself on the right foot, because you said everybody's starting in the wrong on the wrong foot in the wrong place. But first, you mentioned something about Book of Days I'd love to follow up on first, which is you said that in some ways you went off the deep end and went deeper into the Aramaic in this book than you ever had in other books. In what ways did you go deeper in this book? Certain concepts or
well, there are several of the I don't know, maybe a half dozen or a dozen of the little chapters that go quite deeply into just what we've been talking about, Travis. Yeshua's way of knowing, how people perceive the world, how we contrasting it with how we see the world today, and
mm,
some of the problems involved in that. Uh, when we have a world in which everyone feels more and more isolated from one another, in which people feel isolated, you could say, from between themselves and nature, uh, and where they basically end up within a sort of psychologically existential sort of cave where they can't
Yeah.
see out anymore. And
Yeah.
so there's massive amounts of depression and whatever, drug abuse and self-harming and all of this stuff, then there has to be a problem. And the environment is deteriorating around us. So there's got to be a little bit of a problem with the worldview there, or you could say, speaking more bluntly, with our way of consciousness, with human
Yeah.
consciousness. So
Yeah.
one of the messages of that book and my prior book is that human consciousness does change. It can changes. It changed from the time of Yeshua to now. It changed from 100,000 years ago to the time of Yeshua, and it's still going to continue to change. The question is how much and how fast and with how much suffering is all this going to happen.
Mm. And can you hear the vacuum in the background, Neil?
No.
Okay, great. I can feel Raleigh and Evan stirring like, oh man, is this ruining our wonderful volunteer here at our church, Linda, just started vacuuming right when we started shooting, but I don't think it's affecting anything.
No, it's all
So,
good.
so in a fresh way in Book of Days, you directly contrast modern problems with this ancient way of knowing as a direct antidote to that problem. So you make that
Yes.
contrast in a fresh and deeper way, you feel?
Yeah, that's correct. Each book has a little sort of saying at the beginning, here's something to consider this day. It gives a couple of words in Aramaic. Then I say a few words, and here's a problem we have today, basically. Or here's something people are challenged with today. What about privacy, for instance? How much should we share online, or how much should we share with each other when we meet someone,
Yeah.
even person to person? Or, how much is it good for people to acquire?
Yeah.
What is it good for us to eat? What's the best diet? All these things that people will argue about online endlessly. And, so then I sort of pivot then to a saying of Jesus that addresses this. And then the whole thing ends up with a brief meditation where people can consider something for the day and breathe a word or two of Aramaic to help them explore that in their life.
Yeah.
So that's basically each chapter.
And what you found, it sounds like you were taking a more practical and direct approach, saying to the reader, look around you at the way you and the people surrounding you are experiencing reality. Look at it directly. Now, let me directly contrast that. But by going more practical, you also ended up going deeper at the same time.
Yes, that's what I found, actually.
That's great.
I I had hoped that that would be the case. And
Yeah.
also the limit that I had imposed on myself, that I could only use so many words per chapter in order for the book
Nice.
to open properly as an oracle, if people wanted to do that. That
Oh,
also
cool.
helped me. So sometimes limits do help.
Right. And when you wrote Desert Wisdom, you subjected yourself to a nomadic lifestyle, like some kind of actor. Like, what do you call when an actor like submerges in their, like some kind of method actor, I meant to say.
Yeah,
Did you do
Stanislavski, yeah.
anything special lifestyle wise for Book of Days? What did your life look like while you were working on it?
Oh, for Book of Days? No, actually, well, for Desert Wisdom, I was pretty much nomadic during that time.
Right.
My then wife and I didn't have any permanent abode, so we were moving from place to place.
Right.
So that was part of that. No, for Book of Days, actually, it was interesting because uh, Book of Days was worked on just as I was recovering from an operation in the hospital.
Yeah. You had the hip surgery last year.
Yeah, I had some things go wrong with the hip surgery, and so I had already decided that I was going to write this book. So I had limitations already in my health, and so doing this project, say early in the morning every day a bit, it did help me, and so that helped sort of keep it homeopathic, shall we call it?
Yeah.
Compress.
Kind of Ignatian.
Yeah, in some ways, make it smaller, make it stronger.
Yeah. Cool. Um, and then when it comes to starting off on the right foot, I understand that one of your core sources is Faber to Olivet's Hebraic Tongue Restored. And I'm so curious why you hold that book as such a high authority.
Well, that book, and just for people who don't know it, Fabre de Olivet was a
Oh, I said
French
that completely
Kabbalist
wrong.
who was writing in the 19th century, so 1800s, obviously. And then the English translation was done in the early 20th century. So you've got a bit of, how should we say?
Drift.
Yeah, you've got a little bit of drift. But fortunately, the translator was a Sufi, an early 20th century Sufi student anyway. And that did help that person to sort of get more what de Olivet was giving. So why de Olivet is unique is that usually the mystical side of the Hebrew letters, at least at the time I started work on all this, the mystical side of each Hebrew letter, or its possible multiple meanings, one doesn't find in a book. Or even today, if one finds it, one finds that the person has only studied Hebrew, but hasn't studied the other Semitic languages. And by Semitic, again, I would mean everything from, say, Ugaritic to Aramaic or Syriac Aramaic to Arabic. And de Olivet studied all this stuff. So he gives comparative references really to all the Semitic languages. Now, the downside of the book is that it's not that easy to understand, shall we say.
No.
And you're shaking. Yeah, so you know this, Travis.
I've studied
However,
that book a lot and gotten very little out of it. So thank God for your work providing a kind of ladder to it.
well, then, you have to translate that into today. But what de Olivet gives you, he gives you, it's not necessarily his language that is important, but what he's pointing to. If you read the whole thing about 100 times or whatever, you could find that the energy, the way in which letters are energy becomes apparent. The letters are not just letters, words are not just words, but they are, you could say, energies of the unseen gradually coming into form. And that whole view, which he offers a window into, it's a bit of a narrow window, but then it opens out, also connects a lot with what the Sufis say. If you read about Sufi interpretation of Arabic, at least those who actually know anything about it, and that for me was a real key as I was studying Aramaic, because I thought, well, the Sufis are doing this and the Kabbalists are doing this. Why isn't anyone doing this with the Aramaic of Jesus? Whereas it's clear the same things are functioning. If they were before him and after him, how could they not be like, if they weren't functioning in the language at his time, it would be impossible, basically. And his
Right.
statements are perfectly suited to this type of multi-level, you could say, interpretation that I originally started out with in Prayers to the Cosmos.
And D'Olivet was an experiential, esoteric, like contemplative student of the Hebrew characters. He was not just a scholar.
It seems that he was a contemplative. We don't know much about his life. I have not been able to find out much about his life, actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he
So
has
why him?
he
Because
has to have been.
in the Kabbalah tradition, the kind of hermetically influenced branch of the Kabbalah tradition that I've become more interested in lately, even there, he's mentioned sometimes as an unquestionably sound teacher of the Hebrew characters and their meanings. But nobody's ever, and the Kabbalah tradition is always weird like this. It's like, here's an authority, why them? Because we all say so. It's like, because we all know that guy gets it. And when we go to him, we get it better. And we know he gets it because of what we experience when we hear what he says. And it's experiential and word of mouth. It's not really like, well, he put out the most cited scholarly papers. It's just,
No,
it's all kind of vague and tradition based. And so I'm asking the question, why is he such a high authority? But it's not really that answerable of a question, maybe,
not really. And I wouldn't disagree with what you've read from your Kabbalists, actually, about this. One person who does approach de Olivet from outside the tradition is my much referenced Owen Barfield, who I reference quite frequently in my books, or at least in the latter books, who wrote
Yeah.
about language being the evidence of the evolution of consciousness over long periods of time. And Owen Barfield, who is a friend of C.S. Lewis, does mention Fabre de Olivet as one of those who pointed to this also. So, and Barfield does this in his own way, so that helps too.
And does Barfield provide insights into the way that Semitic languages point to the evolution of Semitic consciousness, or does he provide more information about just what language as such is? What's his piece of your work?
Barfield didn't really know Hebrew.
Okay.
But he did know Greek and Latin, though. And that's very important because what he showed me, or what you could say I knew already, but he demonstrated convincingly, was that even the ancient Hebrew could have been translated differently. So even when whoever took the so-called Greek language words of Jesus, what is usually considered the accepted Greek language version of the Gospels, even when they took that, they should have translated it in a much more expansive fashion
Right.
because it's all there. The key
Right.
words are all there. It's just that they had blinders on. Speaking of the blinders you mentioned earlier, they had by that point very heavy theological blinders, and then also imperial blinders, where at that point the Christian religion had gotten in bed with the Roman Empire. And so then you have two major nefarious influences preventing people from seeing what's actually right in front of them. Even in terms of the gendering of the words, where you have all these
Yeah.
feminine gendered words in not only Aramaic but also in Greek.
Yeah.
So
And then another thread of your work that I'm curious about where you found this thread and what exactly its significance is Thorleif Bowman. Why is he an authority on comparing the Greek and Hebrew worldviews? Where'd you find him, and why do you trust his work?
well, he was one of the early books I found. This is even before Barfield, and a little bit after De Olive, maybe 5 so years after. And he was the first person I found that actually talked about the difference in the way, and I don't completely agree with him right now, but the difference in the way that Hebrew language and Hebrew thought and ancient Hebrew thought and ancient Greek thought compared time, how they saw time. And for Bowman, who I think was a Christian, actually, a Christian scholar, that was very important, such that Hebrew has this notion of, and this is actually linguistically true, Hebrew
Mhm.
languages are, Hebrew and Semitic, ancient Semitic languages are synchronic. That means you don't have a strict separation between past, present, and future. So as Bowman pointed out, in ancient Hebrew, there is no word that means to stand still, to sit still, to be still, where it says in the Hebrew scriptures, be still and know that I am God, it just means listen, be quiet and listen. There was no word for being motionless.
Mm.
And likewise, Bowman pointed out that in ancient Hebrew, you couldn't say, I am, or you are, or we are, because there was no word of any sort of word that meant a static state, a state of motionlessness that is not changing. For these languages, everything is always changing. It's part of this ongoing creation story, and this is something that was very important as I did my book on the Genesis material in original meditation, and the other parts of the early creation, ongoing creation tradition. So
Yeah.
Bowman was very good for that, and he's quite readable too. He's much more readable than Fabre de Olive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And when it comes to studying the meanings of the Hebrew characters, so other sources besides the Olivet, I'm curious why it is that you've settled on not taking much as an authority the tree of life diagram. Like you're thinking that that emerged way later than would make it relevant to your research. And
yes,
um,
yes. I did research on this when I was working on Desert Wisdom, the early Desert Wisdom, which was published in 1995, because I thought, well, Tree
yeah,
of Life, that would be good. But
that's where most students are going to end up. If we just get on the internet and we say, I want to know
yeah,
the deep esoteric meanings of the Hebrew characters, we're going to end up on the tree of life diagram via like Dion Fortune and those who came before
yeah,
and after
yeah.
her.
I
So
love Dion. I think Dion Fortune is fabulous, by the way. But
yeah,
at
for
that
example,
point,
her cosmic doctrine and your Genesis meditations are it's strikingly similar, and you produce them completely independently of each other.
yeah, I know. Well, it just shows you that this ancient consciousness about creation is pretty much everywhere. And that's actually the key to the early Kabbalah.
Yeah.
It, at that, in the 90s, I was I was really starting to work a lot in the scholarly world, And so the scholarly opinion at that time, and it still is really, that tree of life and Lurianic Kabbalah
What is Lurianic?
is from Isaac Luria.
Oh, no idea.
The sparks of light, all that lovely stuff. If your folks look it up, all that is much
Yeah.
later. It's probably medieval. Moses de Leon, these sorts of
Yeah.
things.
That was the Zohar guy.
The Zohar.
Yeah. And
So
then,
the early Kabbalah is all Bereshit mysticism, as
yeah.
scholars consider it. That means it's all about the beginnings. And so it's not in Sefer HaZohar, it's in Sefer Yetzirah. And I agree that most people are not going to go there. There is a good translation of it. It's quite deep,
Hmm.
but this is the earliest Kabbalah that possibly or probably was around at the time of Yeshua or slightly before, even if only an oral tradition.
Well, one of the reasons I was so surprised to learn that the tree of life had kind of hermetically influenced later Kabbalah that seems to be spelled with a Q more than a K. I don't know why, but that thread of Kabbalah, I was surprised to learn that it didn't interest you as much because you're also really into Jung. And it seems to me that tradition of Kabbalah is like if you took the ancient Kabbalah and you used Jungian psychology to adapt it comprehensively to a modern mind, which all seems kind of aligned with your work. But it's just, you don't think that it's an original, you don't think it comes from thousands of years ago like they claim, but you probably still think it
No,
would be a useful
no, but it, it,
psychological
it
tool.
is. No, I don't think so. But I think it is real
Oh,
mysticism. There's
oh,
no
okay.
question that it's not genuine. The main reason I was not primarily interested in it because other people had already worked on it sufficiently, I thought. I
Yeah,
don't
okay.
like to do stuff that other people have already done very well. For instance, my friend Tirza Firestone, she's combined Jungian psychology with Kabbalah, I think, in a brilliant way.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the Tarot and
so
everything.
why do I need to do that? I don't need to do that.
Great.
Tirza's done it already.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Yeah. So what are some
Yeah,
of the
I
other,
tend to work on things that people have neglected.
well, that's good because when and to share a brief story about these books behind me. So April 2019, I had a personal internal experience. And when I came out of it, I wanted to learn the Lord's Prayer in the original language. So I Googled whether it was in Greek or Hebrew, and I found your work on Aramaic. And I learned it that day from you. And then a friend, John Roach, gave me Prayers of the Cosmos synchronistically after that. And then another friend, Billy Quinn, gave me Genesis meditation synchronistically after that. And it was signed by you. And I thought, why the hell do you have a Neil Douglas-Klotz book that's autographed by him? Like, what are the odds of this? And he said, well, my dad left it behind. So we went to his house, went into his basement, and Gary Lewis Quinn, his father, who was a diplomat between U.S. and Thailand, and he was a speechwriter for uh, President in '65. I always forget. Johnson? Yeah, Johnson.
Johnson. Yeah, Johnson.
And he negotiated nuclear treaties. So he had all these books on peacemaking and comparative mysticism. And so
Wow.
we found this whole library because Genesis Meditations led us into our friend's basement like a thread. And then we inherited this whole library. And now it chills in
Gosh,
our podcast studio here. So that's why all these books are behind us.
fabulous.
And my point is, when I felt like picking up that thread, that's why it was there to pick up because you had put it there. Even though Prayers of the Cosmos was your first stab at it, and you've grown a lot since then. That thread brought me into the rest of your work, and yeah, there's not really another way to learn to explore the layers of meaning, or at least many of the layers of meaning, not all, in the Aramaic Jesus. So yeah, thanks for picking that up, man. That was a neglected area of study for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I evolved over a period of time in how I was doing things. So it was all about acquiring books at the time when I started.
Right.
And so I would go into bookstores and find things, serendipitously, as we would say. I mean, I was guided to a bookshop. Well, it's actually true, and then here's a book, I didn't know existed, but I need to have this book and it costs like way more than what I make every month. Oops.
Yeah.
How'd that happen? That was me. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, so I gradually acquired things, and by the
Right.
time I had everything that I needed, and actually more than I needed, a lot of things started to go online.
Yeah.
So some of the other sources that are very good for people to have if they want to approach Aramaic is the the Payne-Smith Syriac dictionary, Syriac English dictionary. That can be used as a check.
Payne, right?
Payne Smith.
Yeah.
It's in my bibliographies.
Okay.
Compendious Dictionary of Syriac Aramaic. It's very good.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not good for you could say the cosmology or the epistemology, let I say, but it's a check on if you're rendering roots in Aramaic or in Hebrew, that you've got the right root, or if
Yeah.
you're confused about the root, this can be very helpful. And there's some other texts like that too. When I'm working in Arabic, there's something similar that I work in with in the Arabic language also in this way. Rendering roots is not that easy. There can be multiple by roots for the listeners. That means a letter and its partner letter, or it could have two other letters with it, or there can be two twins within a particular word, and how that all works and interacts within the word is a bit like family systems therapy or something. I mean, or whatever
Yes.
you want to. Having studied psychology over many years, so it's not really science. It's not anything you can say, okay, what's the literal translation of this? But okay, what does the word point towards? And then, okay, then you can see how they got this literal meaning out of it. But also you can see that around all of that is this much bigger picture. And that's what opens us out to the deeper meaning of particular passages, say in Hebrew or Aramaic, or even in Arabic in the Quran. So.
Yeah, you've made my life as a researcher so much easier than yours was. Because if I start with my favorite Aramaic word, for example, is Allah.
Uh-huh.
If I start with what Allah means according to the groundwork that you've laid, then I look at what's Aleph, what's Lamed, what's Hey. Then it's like, when a person hangs out with different people, different sides of them come out, right? So you don't really know a person. Like if you're dating someone, you should hang out with them in groups, right? You want to see how they
Yeah.
interact with different people. If you want to get to know a Hebrew character, you want to see, well, what is a Lamed like when it follows an Aleph? What is a Lamed like when it precedes an Aleph? Exactly. And what does it mean? But now that we can look at the words the way you've communicated them, when we go back to the Olive, the work is 90% done. And now we're just observing why the characters came to mean what they mean in relationship to those other characters.
Correct. Yeah, that's really where I've ended up too, with same place, Travis. Um, and I bring as much as I can to bear on it, but really, what I'm able to see now, even in things that I did 30 years ago, I'm able to see more now.
Yeah.
And that's sort of humbling,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And I look back at things. I was just doing the audiobook version of Prayers of the Cosmos last month. Finally, they got around to doing it, actually.
What?
Yeah, and I was changing things as I went along reading it, because the audiobook people said they don't mind. They just want me to correct it the way it should be. And there was a
So
lot
you
there to
told the publisher
correct.
you're going to edit it as you go, as you read it?
Yeah, I just did it on
Yeah.
the fly, as I was going along.
Cool.
'Cause, anyway, so yeah, I mean, it's just how it is. So
So for students coming to your work right now who are academically minded, so they don't just want to gain general familiarity for their own purposes, but they feel called to be a part of communicating this work formally. They could
yes,
start with Book of Days to get general familiarity for themselves. They could use Revelations to go a little deeper. And then when they want to get downright scholarly, they can go into Barfield, Bowman, de Olivet. Who else would be on that list of who are the scholars they would go into at that stage 2 of getting into your work? You know what I mean?
yeah, at the stage too. Well, one thing that I would insert somewhere in there after the Book of Days or at the same time is read the prologue to Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus.
Yeah.
And in about, I don't know what it is, 1,000 words or so, I try to begin to set them within this ancient consciousness.
Yeah.
And it does people's head in a bit. I agree. Although I think I did it in a very poetic form, but it's something to contemplate because it's a view of the universe that we don't have anymore. It's a view where time and space are not static,
Yeah.
but they're interacting with one another and it's all moving. And there's an unseen world underneath us and around us that is emanating, you could say, when you use the doctrine of emanation, but it's emanating all this at the same time.
Yeah.
So, and I can say that in a few words, but you have to sort of immerse yourself into what that is in ancient consciousness to be able to understand this. Now,
That.
the other person does something similar, but in Greek, is Peter Kingsley.
Oh, really?
And
No, I never not familiar.
yeah, Peter Kingsley works with the ancient pre-Socratic Greek philosophers who he feels, and I think he proves quite adequately, were actually shaman. You could say shaman visionaries. And this is like Empedocles, Parmenides, these folks. And this was, or still is, Peter Kingsley's life work. So he has these quite thorough books where he tries to drop you into some of this consciousness in a
Yeah.
similar way that I try to drop people into the ancient Semitic consciousness. And his books are also, they're very poetic, but they take time. You have to sort of contemplate them as you go along. So I do recommend Kingsley's work with some of this. Um,
Yeah. Who else would be on that list? I had another question, but let's stick with this list for now. Who else would be on stage
you,
two?
you see, I'm giving you people that are doing things in parallel fields,
Yeah.
but nobody's doing exactly what I'm doing
Right.
with the Aramaic. People that you may find online or this or that or the other thing, mostly if you dig a little bit deeper, they basically read my things or they listened to an early audio thing and then they've sort of copied a bit and changed things and put a robe on and a fancy hat or I don't know, whatever. And and then they're presenting it as something new, but actually it's not new. So the other people who are doing similar things with Hebrew are some of the Jewish renewal scholars.
Mm.
These are, how would we say, these are students of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, who passed away some years ago. Rabbi Zalman himself didn't do much writing. He did a few books, but it's his students that carried some of this on. So there's a beautiful, you could say, midrashic expansion of the Song of Songs
Mm.
from the Hebrew scripture. Great. It's straight on mystical midrash.
Cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I can't remember I think it's called The Path of Blessing. I can't remember. Martha
I'll check
Prager,
that and add it in the description of this video.
Rabbi Martha Prager, but you look up some of this, and this would be a separate rabbit hole that leads you into the modern Jewish mystical midrash,
Yeah.
which also sometimes has a political component. So that's
Right.
because there's always a both and. There's an inner and an outer with
Yeah.
some of these things, as there was with Jesus. There's the outer disruption goes along with the inner disruption, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anyone else you would list as a good stage two go to?
If you want a clean, and I'll explain what I mean by clean, word for word translation of Syriac Aramaic, it's also worth looking at George Kiratz, Kirazz, whom I also reference in my books.
Mm.
And he did something similar to George Lomsa, where he corrects the worst of the mistranslations from the Aramaic, really from the worst of the mistranslations, to rewind a bit, the worst of the mistranslations from the Greek, and then how the Aramaic corrects these 400 or 500 different mistranslations, like lead us not into temptation in Jesus's prayer. Well, it doesn't say lead us not into temptation. And even the Greek doesn't actually say that, as I discovered. So so he corrects all of that. And so you have a clean, you could sort of Aramaic word for word translation just to have, by your side. He's not going to get into the multi-levels at all.
And that's a
That doesn't happen.
translation of the Bible or of what? Like, is that similar to George Lomsa's Eastern Manuscript
Yes,
Bible?
similar, but Kiraz is still alive and he's still working in this area. So yes,
He
he
did the whole
recently did, I
text as
think,
well. He did his own Bible translation.
yes,
Okay, cool.
yes, of the New Testament at least, of the so-called New Testament.
Okay, cool.
The other people to look at, and again, this is parallel, but these are things that have helped me, and it doesn't necessarily help a person getting into this, but you have to look into classical Arabic.
Mm.
So the works of some of the really deep, you could say Sufi commentators on the Quran, where they're working with the individual roots and letters and words in the same way I've done with with Aramaic. And premier among these is really Sheikh Fadlallah Hayeri. So, he has a wonderful multi-volume commentary on the Quran where he goes into sort of word by word key surahs, some of the important differences
Yeah.
that they're not only mistranslations, but they're deeper levels. For instance,
You
in
were
the
an editor
Quran,
on that project, yeah?
say what?
You were an editor on that project?
Well, this is the thing I was on the editor on was a sort of all-in-one book, but where he does more of this, what I would call, what they call in Jewish mysticism, midrash, the multi-leveled. And in Sufi, they call this tawil, the multi-leveled interpretation of the Quranic language,
Yeah.
is a different book, which is called, excuse me,
Yeah, no
I'll be
rush.
back. Yeah, sorry, Travis, I'll have to send it to you later. But
Yeah, there will be a lot of notes in the description of this video.
yeah, there will. But so
Get all that
he's
later.
the one to read on this, and he's still around too, although he's mostly retired and he doesn't travel around and teach and like this. So he's in
So
his 80s.
this is something for students who are interested in going Neil 201. I'll have notes like this in the description because what I hear you saying is to understand the original meaning of Jesus's words, you want to look at it from a kind of Christian, Greek, Jewish, Hebrew, Quranic, Arabic, triple surround sound perspective to get a really grasp from different angles on that original way of knowing. And without exploring all the Abrahamic threads, you can't penetrate what Jesus said as comprehensively. You can't just treat it as a strictly Christian thing because all of those threads provide angles on it.
This was my journey, as we now say. Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, my PhD is in the interpretation, hermeneutics of ancient Semitic languages.
Right.
So it was this sort of cross language approach in order to, you could say, using Heinlein's term, in order to grok, the understanding, the way of knowing that was there for thousands of years, and how it plays out into keywords in the Hebrew, in the Aramaic, in the Arabic, and actually in Egyptian and a lot of the other Semitic languages too. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's not easy, but here I am. What can I tell you? I didn't know I was going to do this to start out.
Yeah.
It just sort of builds, and that's how life goes. But I think there could be somebody who would want to do this. It's not that hard. Once you've learned Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet, you've basically learned the Aramaic alphabet. And then the Arabic changes a bit because there are more letters, and some of the Hebrew Aramaic letters get split into multiple Arabic letters, and they don't always transfer directly, if that makes any sense. And so Devalave is again helpful here because he gives a comparative alphabet. In the earlier part of the book, comparative alphabets. So once one has that, you've sort of got a skeleton key to start. And then you just have to deepen in your own meditative understanding. I mean, to put it bluntly.
Because the reason that younger people like me are trying to do this work is first and foremost because we're human beings desperate for meaning, and we're human beings who experience reality in a raw way.
Yep.
And so we can easily fall down this pitfall, this kind of intellectual booby trap, where we get stuck doing linguistic puzzles for decades when really what we were looking for was a kind of mindfulness, like a just kind of way of experiencing reality more directly and a kind of sense of wholeness. And so I think it's advisable for us to, if we're interested in Aramaic specifically, what did Jesus originally say? What was his original worldview? We might get what we need out of just contemplating the work that you've put forth. Maybe it's not that we want to be scholars and puzzle piecer togethers for 4 decades. Maybe it's just that we want to see reality the way that Jesus did. And once we have that, that's plenty. And so, I mean, we got to start there, right? And then go the next step.
I couldn't put it better, Travis. That's exactly what I would tell folks. Don't try and be me.
Yeah. Because you are,
be you.
Yeah.
And you'll do something fabulous. You'll do something fantastic. But yeah, basically, exactly what you said. It's about developing being part of this changing human consciousness.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about,
Yeah.
because we need some change, and we're going to get it whether we like it or not. So why not get ahead of it, as we would say.
Right. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. So my primary teacher, Paul Sugar, he's a mindfulness teacher, but he also has a huge background in the kind of Dion Fortune branch of Kabbalah.
Hmm.
And one of our one of the things that we advise in our lineage of that tradition is if we were going to study a work like Cosmic Doctrine by Dion Fortune, that is a set aside, undivided attention contemplation. I've tried listening to Cosmic Doctrine while I was cleaning bathrooms at work for the Parks Department, and I started to lose my mind, dude, because it's a kind of deep psychological surgery. It's a kind of cosmological reorganizing, which is
Yeah.
it is borderline psychedelic, and it's because we're trying to disentangle our mind in from all the craziness that we've gotten tangled up in, psychologically, so we can experience reality again. I've never seen one of those warnings in your work. Like the prologue of Revelations, for example, is what I'm talking about. It's a psychological reorganizing. Is it advisable to just listen to the Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus audiobook while you go about your day? Or would you advise, like in our lineage of the tradition, do this with your undivided attention and see how it shapes you. Don't do this halfway. You get what I'm asking?
Yeah, for Revelations, actually for all my books, that's what I would really recommend.
So why
Don't
even put out the audiobooks? I guess people can sit down and listen to the audiobooks with their undivided.
my publisher, they want to do these things. People are listening to these things, and I wouldn't recommend listening to the Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus audiobook full stop. So
Oh, I don't even like the narrator doesn't even know the pronunciations correctly. I'm like, I know that Neil wasn't very involved in this production
no,
here.
I protested. But anyway,
I'm sure.
I'm just a person. Who am I? I'll say one more thing about, anyone who's listening who is on the scholarly path. If you really need to develop intuition to succeed on the scholarly path, even on that level. Because exactly as you say, Travis, there are all these blind tunnels and dead ends and getting lost in the minutiae of this or that. And I've seen so many scholars do that without any sense of intuition. And this means meditation of some sort, any sort. You will end up there. So you
Yeah.
have to have intuition to tell you that when you're looking at a source, immediately, yes or no. Shall I read this now or not? And more as I developed that, I found my scholarship getting easier, and I was inevitably led to the right things and to put the pieces in the puzzle together, and it just all happened much more quickly.
Yeah. And why do you emphasize yes or no? Are you saying don't read anything halfway?
No, I just mean, when I say yes or no, I mean, shall I read this now
Yeah. Is
or
this my
not?
next step here?
Not never read it, but
Right.
is this something or not? And of course, there are techniques one can use as a scholar to quickly sort of skim through, abstract, try to feel, is this anything new, or does this person have anything to say? But really, intuition is a large part of that as well.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, that's for those who are on the scholarly path. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to discourage people. If you can make some turn, if you can move the river a little bit in a more healthy and healthful direction, please do. That is the scholarly river.
Right. Yeah. In whatever way is really, really unique to you and really exciting to you.
Absolutely.
What else comes to mind for you now?
Well, just a lot of gratitude for you, Travis, because you've brought up a lot of questions that people don't usually ask. And you've been a little bit further down these rabbit holes than almost anybody who's done any of these interviews with me has. So I think that's, for me, just as a human person, that's very enlivening. And I've loved, being here and talking to you and whoever's going to listen to this and has bothered to listen through this far.
I'm very touched by that, Neil. Thank you. And speaking of
Thank you.
enlivening, you don't look 83.
I'm not 83.
Aren't you? How old are you?
I'm only 74.
Oh, well, that was rude. I could have swore Whatever. Well, you don't look 74 either, dude. This work keeps
Yeah,
you.
actually, I won't be 74 until October, but anyway, whatever.
You're trying to make my comment a little less rude.
You don't look anything like 60. No.
Yeah, you give me this nice compliment, and then I go, so I heard you're 99. What a jerk.
We are ageless in our souls.
We sure are. No, but really, you look extremely healthy for an old man. What is it about this work that keeps you young?
Well, doing things like this, and I still do a lot of chanting and meditation, and, it's not just book stuff for me.
Living in Edinburgh probably helps too, right?
Yeah, we're actually
Beautiful
outside of
place.
Edinburgh right now, and about 10 years ago, my wife and I moved up here, and so I'm 5 minutes away from a nature district.
Yeah,
We are, and I was just up there earlier today and walking in the woods, and fabulous. That also keeps me quite young-ish,
yeah.
young-ish.
I had one more question. I would love to hear your thoughts on, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, but Sheikh Fadlala. I absolutely love his videos and his whole style, and he strikes me as one of those religionists who is not at all attached to his religion. Like he is just, he's speaking straight from the human heart. He's speaking straight about reality. Um, I have such a great feeling about him. What do you love about him, and how'd you meet him, and what do you want to say about him?
Well, just his fabulous heart. I mean, really, he is a very deep Quranic scholar. Um, and his whole life story is very interesting because he was born into a very uh, devout family, we'll call it, but also you could say in some ways a mystical family in Karbala in Iraq in
Mm,
the pre division of all these things after the Western powers got a hold of them.
mm,
And his father was an alchemist,
mm,
but he became more or less secular for a period of time and went to work in the Gulf. And then he got connected with Swami Chinmayananda and followed Swami Chinmayananda around quite a bit, who was
mm.
apparently, I had never met Chinmayananda, but he's apparently was also a very deep mystic from what I've heard. Not all the Swamis are, but he was. And Chinmayananda sent him back to sort of his own tradition to try to bring things out of it.
Yeah,
So, yeah, his some of his podcasts or his videos I mean, they're all fabulous, actually. I love them all. Some are more accessible to people just starting out, and some you have to already know a little bit about Quran to get into it.
yeah,
But he has some wonderful, wonderful things, and he's very he. What you say about him is correct. He's very open and about where things are going today.
yeah,
I don't want to paraphrase him, but he feels that we're moving towards some sort of path that is beyond religion, you could call it, that will help humanity come back into a more healthy relationship with itself, with nature, with everything. And he doesn't necessarily feel it's going to happen in an established religion. So,
Okay, so that does lead me to just one final question, which is one of the hesitations I've had about your work before, and one of the things I've wrestled with is we never want to look for the truth in the past, but by seeing how we've moved from the past to the present, we can understand a more timeless truth. That's kind of where I've arrived at. And so the reason I say this is we are more hyper individualistic now than we were in the time that your work focuses on.
yeah.
But are you feeling that that could be a step in a productive direction, that we go from not feeling a fixed or concretized sense of identity to feeling a hyper concretized and fixed sense of identity to feeling a profoundly universally integrated individualism?
Yeah, I think exactly. I mean, we're not going to go back to be the way we were as humanity. That's
Right.
quite clear,
Yeah.
either in outer lifestyle or in consciousness. But using the individualized consciousness we have today, as you would say, Travis, hyper individualized, we can make a choice. And this is what comes with individualized self. We can make a choice, a free choice, to integrate the consciousness that we had earlier within this, so to speak. So then you have the whole in a much deeper way.
Right.
And this, I would say, a person, yet another reference for people could really get into if they wanted to, reference for some of this point of view, which echoes mine exactly, is Rudolf Steiner and his work on the evolution of consciousness. So this is really Steiner feels that, or Steiner felt, since he's no longer around, but he still feels, hopefully, that human consciousness will be going to this more full place where we make the free choice as free individuals to integrate the consciousness of the past and then move into a whole new way of being where we're able to see, the cosmic Christ in each other rather than waiting for the second coming in a particular person.
Well, that sounds great.
That sounds good to me. I'll go for that.
Thank you so much, Neil.
You're welcome, Travis. Thanks for having me.
Night school.
Night school. Good night.
Why did I have to screw that up with that stupid age question? The whole interview was going perfectly.
It was a funny little moment.
It adds humor. Adding humor is always good.
Oh my gosh, my inner professionalism was like, why did I have to ask one stupid question out of a solid hour-long interview?
No, it was amazing. It's fun. It's fun.
It's all good. It's all good.
That was an absolute blast, man. I'm so grateful for your time, Neil.
Thanks, Travis. It was great. Yeah, it was really good. How did we do on time? Oh gosh, we're pretty much on time too.
I just felt it was about an hour. I didn't even check the time this whole time. My brain just said that's an hour. 10:59. Let's go.
It's very full. No, you did great.